In today's video, you will learn one of the most terrible and mystical disappearance of a boy who was very young, what happened to him, and why he was never found. More than 800,000 children under the age of 18 disappear in the United States every year, and that's just the official missing persons statistics. The disappearance of Charles Ross, also known as Charley, occurred on July 1, 1874. He was born on May 4, 1870. This case of kidnapping for ransom received widespread media attention, and to this day, his fate remains unsolved. It is believed to be one of the most famous disappearances in U.S. history. At the time, in 1874, Christian Cross, a respected and wealthy man, lived with his family in a spacious mansion on East Washington Lane, Germantown, Philadelphia. There were 7 children in the family: Strayton, Harry, Sophia, Walter, Charley, Marion, and Annie. Of all the children, the cutest and smartest was Charley Ross, a boy with long curls and only 4 years old. He was a little overweight, but everyone around him adored him for his lovely looks and unusual intelligence. In July 1874, in Germantown, an affluent neighborhood in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Charley and his brother Walter decided to play in the yard of their family home. Suddenly, a horse-drawn carriage pulled up to their house and 2 men got out of it. Charley was interested and asked them if they could give him a ride. The 4th of July was approaching, and the boy Charley, about to celebrate the day, asked the strangers if they could buy him candy and firecrackers. Walter, who was with them, was previously familiar with the men as they drove by and waved to him. As they continued on their way, Charley wondered why they didn't stop at the candy store, but it was explained to him that they were on their way to Aunt Susie's store, where they could get pockets full of candy for only 5 cents. At the store in Philadelphia, the boys were agreed to buy fireworks, for which Walter was given 25 cents, $6.47 Todai. While Walter was selecting the merchandise, his friends drove off in a carriage, leaving him alone. Walter experienced fear and began to cry loudly. Mrs. Henry Pickett, noticing him, took him to his father. Some witnesses saw the boys with the men, but after visiting Walter's store, both the horse and cart disappeared. July 3, Mr. Ross was surprised by a mysterious letter that came into his hands. It contained information that the motive for the crime was not obvious and clear to others. Everyone who heard about the missing child began to form their theories. Some speculated that distant relatives had kidnapped the boy to play a prank on his father and his entire family. Others claimed that the child had been sold to child kidnappers. The most unusual version was that the boy's father himself had kidnapped and hidden him to achieve fame. But few believed this theory. Take a little vacation, Mr. Ross, and remember to leave your son with us. We'll keep him under lock and key until you show us your generosity. If you decide to go to the police to find your son, be prepared for the consequences. Charley will never be found by you. If we find out that the police are searching for the boy, we will not hesitate to harm him. Your money is the only thing that can save your son from us. We'll contact you as soon as possible. The entire Ross family was gripped with panic and horror after reading this message. They were utterly bewildered and did not know what to do. They all longed to see Charley alive and unharmed, but they could only wait for the next letter from these men. The message itself was written in unkempt handwriting and in a crude, illiterate style, with many simple words misspelled. The U.S. authorities began to disregard the legal rights of citizens to private property and to search every home without the consent of its owners. Those who protested were officially accused of kidnapping the boy. Searches were conducted not only on land, but also in forests, in all large and even small cities in the United States, and on the water. Many vessel searches were carried out, but unfortunately no trace of the boy was found. But a large amount of stolen items were found, for which the perpetrators will be sent to jail. The parents of the young children, meanwhile, were so frightened by the current events that they would not allow the children to leave the house. Mr. Ross's second letter, received on July 6, contained a ransom demand of $20,000 from the kidnappers. Threatening the parents, the criminals warned that they would kill Charley if detectives continued to search and if the kidnappers' conditions were not met. The letter also stated that if Mr. Ross wanted to make contact with the kidnappers and was willing to make a deal with them, he should give them a sign. The man was to write to the Philadelphia Ledger daily newspaper and ask them to publish the following message: "Ross, we are ready to negotiate." The parents and authorities, cooperating with the city police, decided to continue to correspond with the alleged kidnappers and draft such letters that required a response. The police hoped that by doing so they would be able to identify the kidnappers. The boy's father was in a state of simultaneous joy and panic after receiving the letter, as he did not know what it said. He feared that his son might have been killed, but it was also a possibility that the kidnappers had decided to return the boy right away. On July 7, however, the demands were published in the Philadelphia Ledger newspaper, and the same day Ross received a return letter, asking him if he agreed to the kidnappers' terms. Contrary to fears that the kidnappers would misunderstand and kill the child, the decision was made to start communicating with them after all. Earlier, the kidnappers had also made a decision, and the last letter stated, "Rose is willing to fulfill the conditions to the best of his ability." On July 9, the kidnappers received a message that they did not understand what was happening and that they were losing patience. It became clear to them the reasons behind this behavior on the part of Mr. Ross. Despite the clear response from the kidnappers, Ross continued to post messages in the newspaper for a while longer. The kidnappers had already ignored all information, and the boy's parents stated that they would not pay any money as these monsters had killed their child. In total, more than 20 ransom demand letters were mailed by the kidnappers to Christian Ross. These letters demanded him to pay $20,000 to bring his son back to safety. However, Christian found it difficult to meet their financial demands, as it was nearly impossible for him to get his hands on the $20,000 at the time. He could have asked the authorities for help, but it was unknown if they would agree and be able to provide such a large amount of money. The kidnappers probably thought that the Ross family, because of the size of their home and the affluent neighborhood in which they lived, was wealthy and could easily pay the required amount to get their son back safely. NYPD Chief George Walling, on August 2, sent the original letters of the criminals to Philadelphia. Unaware that Christian Ross was unable to pay the ransom due to the loss of his money in the stock market crash of 1873, Captain Haynes of the Philadelphia Police, having all the necessary papers, went to New York. Chief Walling was certain that the culprit was William Mosher, known as Johnson, as his handwriting was recognized by Walling's informant. In April 1874, the informant reported an attempt by Mosher and Joseph Douglas, nicknamed Clark, to persuade him to participate in the kidnapping of a Vanderbilt child who was playing on the front lawn of a house in Tonic, Long Island. In response to the kidnapper's last letter, received on November 6, Mr. Ross replied that two relatives were to go to New York with the necessary amount of money. However, at 2:00 a.m. on December 14, 1874, an alarm in the house went off and awakened the family of the judge's brother, occurring near the place where the money was to be handed over. William Scott and Herman Frank, hired workers from a security company, were called to Mr. Van Brunt's house. He suspected that a strong gust of wind might have opened the window and decided to send his son Albert to check the situation. The young man returned to his father and told him that he had seen a dark figure with a candle outside his uncle's house. When William and Herman arrived on the scene, all four armed themselves with shotguns and revolvers and went to the house. Two of the men took up a position near the main entrance while the other two headed for the backyard. In spite of the drizzling rain and biting wind, they had to wait about an hour before they noticed two dark figures climbing out of the cellar. There was a loud shout from the owner of the house, but the answer was only 2 pistol shots. He then ventured to fire the entire clip at the assailant. The second man attempted to respond with a shot at the homeowner, but missed. The second robber then decided to try his luck and escape, but was met on his way by the homeowner's brother. The brother committed murder on the second robber. Despite his many bullet wounds, the second robber continued shooting until his bullets ran out. The gunshots woke up all the residents of the neighborhood. When the first robber realized that his time of life was coming to an end, he asked for water and made the following confession. Mosher and I, Joseph Douglas, are responsible for our truthfulness. In my pocket is $40 earned by my labor. I want to be buried with that money. But this is not the end. I'm dying, and I can't keep the truth from you. We kidnapped Charley Ross, Mosher and I. When asked what happened to the boy, I told him he'd be home in a few days, unharmed. But the reality is that no one knows what happened to the boy. He has not returned home, and the search for him continues. Maybe he was kidnapped and held captive, awaiting ransom. Maybe he was murdered, but no one has seen him since.